Welcome to AstroTwins Radio, your cosmic GPS for life, love, and everything written in the stars. We're Tali and Ophira Edut, the AstroTwins, here to decode the astrology of the moment and help you navigate your destiny like a pro.
Hey everyone, Tali and Ophi back here with part 2 of our weekly podcast. This one actually covers matters of a transit that Freudian skipped, which is Venus and justice-oriented Libra. And we're going to be talking about a matter that you may or may not have heard about because it's very much inside the astrology community, but it's one that we feel we have to address, and it covers race, racism, justice, community, fragility, all of the things. And we'll give you the backstory in a minute, but it was something we wanted to have a few conversations with people about first, really sit with and talk about, even though we had some very immediate reactions.
So Venus is a planet of love, friendship, harmony, and good vibes between people. And this Thursday, August 6th, Venus starts its first of 2 transits this year through Libra, the sign of justice, harmony. It's one of the 2 home signs for Venus. Taurus and Libra are. And Libra is the air sign that Venus rules, and air is about communication and words and how things travel, the spread of information, air signs. So Venus is in Libra from August 6th until September 9th for its first run. And then it's part of a retrograde that happens October 3rd till November 13th. Venus has its once every 18 months retrograde for 6 weeks. And it starts in Scorpio and then ends up in Libra. So it was important for us to cover Venus because it ties into the incident that Tali alluded to, which was with a person we consider 2 people that we have considered not only friends, but have been colleagues, and we've worked on a project with, we've had on our podcast. And you recently heard him on our podcast. Stephen Forrest, who is a renowned astrologer, created an app called Leela with Ricky Williams, who is a Heisman Trophy winning football player turned astrologer, and Ricky's wife, Linnea. So the 3 of them are business partners on an app called Leela, which we contributed to and consulted on in 2020, 2021, even I think into a little bit of 2022, when it was getting started. And we came to know Stephen through that and astrology conferences.
Yes. And what happened this week, and if you're part of the astrology community, it's hard to not hear about this because it's kind of going around through all of social media. So Stephen and Ricky did a podcast together on shadow work and race. And we've made a point of listening to the entire podcast. And in the middle of it, at about 40 minutes, Stephen was talking about how people in the 70s and 80s would try to grapple with overcoming racial stereotypes by using racial slurs with each other. And he proceeded to not only, use the term the N word, but say the word with a hard R, which was jarring to say the least. And the conversation, yeah. And Ricky and him seem to have, the kind of friendship where they go those places. They talk about everything. And they were attempting to reveal their own shadows around race. Stephen also made a few other comments, one of them being that it wasn't until he was in his 30s that he, and I'm quoting this, realized that Black people were as intelligent as white people, which is another comment that did harm. And when a conversation about the KKK arose, to which he, interestingly enough, has lineage, he kind of soft pedaled it, saying that the KKK was formed to defend white women after their husbands had died in the war, white widows. Well, needless to say, our views diverge wildly from this. And it's important for us to come on here and say that we do not condone any of those statements. In fact, we condemn them. We condemn racism. We condemn the harm that's come from using those words or sharing sentiment like that in a public forum. The reason why some shadow work is done in private first, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yes. And I heard a lot of that being realized while it was being said out loud. So, we have never shied away from calling friends and family out in private in those conversations when they happen. But this is one of a rare few times where someone that we knew a certain way. I mean, I don't assume anyone's level of awareness, education, or enlightenment is anywhere. I like to think that people know better, but I don't assume. But that was really crossing a line of like what most people know not to do. Like it's safer to assume these days that people know not to say that in public. So we just for the record, in case someone thinks we're publicly shaming someone, we both have communicated with Stephen privately and personally through email first. But the reason we're coming on here is to because when harm is done on a public level, and especially by someone that we have supported who still doesn't seem to fully have grasped the gravity of it. This incident is an example of where we, as the creators of a platform that many people follow in this community and longtime members of the astrology community, we have our first responsibility is to continue to create conditions of emotional safety and trust with our readers and the other members of the community, not to protect someone who, a lot of people would also say have, even as hurt and angry and ready as many people are to cut him off if they haven't already. um, Many people who have been students and bonded with Stephen over the years, and read his books and whose lives have been touched by him, would rightly be feeling the kind of inner turmoil and turmoil or conflict that a trauma bond can create.
Maybe we should talk about our initial responses, what we've gone through since this, and
Yeah.
because
Yeah, because I have been reading about trauma responses over the years because it's a topic that comes up a lot with our readers. So maybe it wasn't always this way with astrology, but since we found it in the 90s, we happened to find astrology at the same time that we were publishing our magazine Hues, which was a magazine that was for an intersectional feminist magazine. Um, it was the inclusive magazine that we always wanted to find on the newsstands, but never did. And we went into some real uncomfortable but real terrain in the topics that were covered. And it happened to intersect with our growing love and passion for astrology. And that was not an accident because astrology was a space, a safe space that many people came to when they felt that they were erased from visibility, when they were told by the world that because their different identifications didn't check boxes and that they didn't belong or exist or matter. Um, Astrology gave us a place where we could find being or start to find it. And that might sound silly and frivolous to someone who can't relate to that, but for marginalized communities, women, trans people, anyone who's ever felt erased, and astrology alle- gave a place to center yourself from as kind of the main character in your life and find power, and to start to talk about the social and human and political issues that you were also experiencing.
And
So,
that said, the quote unquote astrology community has only recently been a space that has been open and welcoming and consciously calling in non-white and largely male astrologers. When I started going to the NORWAC conference, which I didn't even know about, the Northwest Astrological Conference, like we don't come, people are like, wow, you didn't go to conferences all those years. It's like we found astrology as, Detroit girls reading horoscopes in the paper, then finding books and learning about ourselves. We didn't come at it from an academic place. In fact,
yeah.
that wasn't even accessible to us. We
I would try to buy
I
like
didn't even
these
know.
astrology magazines, and I'd be like, what are they talking about? Like, we were very much in the lived experience
And
and
still, and still are.
still are.
And when I went to Norwalk, when I first moved to Seattle, I was like, wow, there's an astrology conference here. I found it through Rick Levine and Jeff Jower, who's no longer around. He passed away, but the two of them used to write the annual guides in Barnes and Noble, and they would do these monthly Astro Salon type things in Redmond, Washington. And I moved out here for love and marriage. And I was like, oh my God, where am I? I'm away. And then I came to find out it was a big astrology hub. And I remember I went to a conference. I forgot what year it was. Maybe it was 2010 or 11. And Stephen Forrest was there, and he was like this,
Yeah.
impresario. But it was like Rick and Steven and Rob Hand, and very much like these kind of luminaries. They called themselves the wizards, but it was still like, and that's not to detract anything from the incredible work they did, but it was just not a space that, the stars of the show were white men, and I want to really acknowledge astrologer Sam Reynolds, who is black and really made a point. I think he was involved in the ISAR board. I don't know if he still is, but he's an incredible astrologer, incredible lecturer and teacher, and a friend of ours as
Writer,
well, and
great writer.
writer. He wrote an incredible response to Stephen as a friend, too. But he consciously he actually created a scholarship program for queer and BIPOC. And that's actually how, Colin Bedell, who's one of our dear friends, came to Norwalk and, you know, has been, as well as other friends too, through Sam's conscious effort to invite them in, which to me is, the community, the astrology community, just like everything else that, seems to be established, has a history of unconscious white supremacy. And I have to say that. And I think the conversation that's going around is like defending Stephen. He's not racist. And, like the
Kind of
conversation,
missing the plot.
it's diverted to proving that he's not racist. Now, here's my perspective. We live in a racist society. Racism is the global condition, a global illness that has not been healed. White supremacy is alive and well. So for anyone white and even, Jewish, white, whatever, to claim that you're not racist, that you don't have a racist bone in your body is to deny white supremacy exists almost. You know, I would say
It's the point, it's not, it doesn't matter whether you are or aren't racist in your thoughts or deeds.
you
What
said
Because
something.
we still are, well, you still benefit from the privileges that are afforded to people with white skin, including us. Our family is varying hues of skin tone from light to dark, but we ended up on the light side because of our mixed ancestry. And how people see us is one way. There's how you see the world, but how the world sees you, and what you just are automatically afforded by all these invisible to many privileges. And so the invalidation of, one of the reasons we decided we had to do this now too was just seeing the comments on some of the posts by the astrology conferences and people who have spoken out. And it's very divided among, people who are hurt and traumatized, mostly people of color, and are just like,
They feel
no, never.
betrayed. They feel
Yeah.
betrayed by
Feel
this.
betrayed. They may have
Yeah.
invested in Stephen's books and teachings over the years. Some have never heard of him, but are seeing this for the first time. Others, and then many, mostly white people, some international, so they didn't grow up with United States racism, which is a unique beast of its own. Uh, they are just like, I don't understand. You said you're sorry. Everybody needs to move on. That's not who you are. So, what I guess our point here is that when is this going to end? How is this going to end if we don't all collectively see it as our responsibility to? So, what, I've two modalities came to mind for me. Just trauma responses was one, and what I've learned in Kabbalah in another. So, what I learned in Kabbalah is a concept called bread of shame, where if you take away someone's work from them, their spiritual evolutionary work, uh, you're actually giving them more of a shadow. You're giving them more spiritual burden, and it's because you're actually giving them sort of a karmic heaviness called bread of shame. It's the reason that lottery winners lose their earnings within 3 years, because they haven't done the inner work to be able to hold that level of energy that money represents. So if everyone rushes to forgive, um,
Or
then
gloss it over. You're not
yeah, or gloss it
racist. Yeah.
over because you're uncomfortable with it, which we fully understand because we are too. Yeah, then you're giving Stephen bread of shame, yourself bread of shame, the community bread of shame. We had Stephen on our podcast. Ironically, on Juneteenth, on June 19th, we were recording right as Chiron moved from Aries to
And
Taurus. And
he
we had a
and he was
conversation
very
with that
like
about him.
honoring. That's the thing. It's like, okay, this is where the
Yeah.
duality, it's all about duality. And one of the, yeah, I want to just divert quickly. I don't want to take away from what you're about to say about the other thing you learned, because I think it's a key point. But the argument that Stephen has been making is like, I'm the least racist person. Look at my friendship with Ricky Williams, who's black. But it's like having a black, like I want to say, having a black friend or 10 black friends does not absolve you of racism. You can't, it's a blind spot. I know Stephen personally wants to be anti-racist. I think he thought that by confessing, from my understanding, and is that he thought that by, kind of, it's almost like, well, if I confess my sins and my beliefs that I had, that white people were more intelligent, then I am sharing my shadow so that we can finally have an open dialogue about that. But that is not where anti-racist work has evolved to in 2026. And I think I would call upon him and, and Ricky and Linnea too, to get with the program there on where the anti-racist movement has come, because seeing images of racial violence, hearing words of racial violence do harm. We don't need to relive the history over and over again,
And let's also emphasize they do lasting harm. They reawaken generational and ancestral trauma as well as lived experience trauma for anyone who has been, especially for anyone who has been
Epigenetic trauma.
subject of that. Yeah. So,
Maybe a weird example, but just comes to mind. Like as Jewish kids, we had to go to Hebrew school. You did Hebrew day school. You would go after school on a Wednesday and then you'd go on Sunday morning. And I think we were only in like second grade, and we were shown a film strip about the Holocaust. And we watched film strips back then. They were like, this is the 70s. Anyways, um, and I just remember, and there's another one that's still stuck in my psyche about, the Russian gulags and
oh
prison.
yeah, I remember seeing that
And
too.
seeing just seeing those images, even though they were trying to teach us our history, and just, or seeing like the yellow star with Jude on it that, the
Or people in
Jews were forced to wear.
concentration camps, like that trauma.
Like,
I mean,
how do we, it's like, just even saying it now, just is like, it makes me want to like just run around the block or take a shower, or I don't know, hit something. It just brings up a lot in my body. And the N word is like it's just for, not even being black and hearing that word said by anyone white. It's like, it feels like a bomb detonating. It really
yeah,
does.
it
And
does
I can't
because
imagine, and that's for me, but for someone who has that historical, in their cells and DNA, to have to hear that, like an apology is not enough. And I'm not racist. I have a black friend. Apology is not going to be enough. And I'm really hoping, haven't had a chance to talk to Stephen again, but, we'll be calling upon him and asking him to do more, because I know he doesn't want to be a racist, but what he did was racist. So,
and I think to that point I'd even expand that out more. It's like there is we have what is our shared responsibility for the presence of racism? Like
yes.
what people are getting hooked on is he or isn't he a racist, like a condemning of his character. In some ways it doesn't matter for the people who've been hurt. Like you don't even have to listen to this because it's like the harm that was done to you is the harm that was done to you, and it doesn't matter if he is or isn't. But if we're going to like step back and talk about it, like what are we collectively responsible for us as white Jewish women with Sephardic Jewish ancestry that didn't show up in our outer appearance DNA. Um, we know that it's not our right to tell anyone how to feel about this. But what we feel is our responsibility as allies is to risk a relationship with someone who we like, admire, etc., for a better world that we want to live in, and we want him to live in it too. We want to all live in a world. What's getting lost a little bit is what could be possible if we did all say this is a collective disease and pandemic of sorts that's still alive and well. I was just watching in Chicago this black father and his two sons were at an Airbnb at a friend's pool, and a white woman who's a building manager tried to call the police on him and demand an ID, and he was filming her. And one of his two adorable sons was crying and, Daddy, I don't want you to go to jail. Please just go get your ID. And this woman could just stand there in her
Stone
rightness,
faced. Yeah.
calling the police on this family that's just sitting there while this little boy is being traumatized. And I mean, I can't even talk about it without feeling
Mm.
traumatized myself, which is not the issue because I'm way more concerned about him, about
Yeah.
this little boy. But it's like,
Well, that goes to the trauma
we need to have,
responses that
yeah,
you were going
yeah.
to
So
talk about
exactly.
because you were talking
Yeah.
about fawning earlier
Yeah.
when we were privately discussing
Yeah.
this.
We were talking about the trauma response that many people know is fight or
Fold.
flight. Fight or flight. It's, PTSD was only even named and treated in the 1980s. You have to think about, Stephen was born in 1949. You have to think about he was by that point in his 40s. And so a whole generation of people and us in our childhood being born in 1972, there was no concept of PTSD. So now we have much more developed trauma responses. It's fight, flight, and freeze, but a relatively newer one is fawning. And that was one that we are well trained in, and many, I think, people who would be considered baby boomer and even Gen X are steeped in as well. That Depression era, grandparent and parent, where you had to just respect your elders.
Mm.
Not that that's a bad thing, but that was drilled into us. And no matter what those elders did to us, we had to be good, please, shut down our own bodies and systems and survival mechanisms telling us that it wasn't okay or we had to go into fight or flight. But fawning is what you see people doing with Donald Trump or anyone they've put on a guru pedestal of like, apologizing for them, smoothing it over. And somebody in the comments under one of the posts said there were a lot of fawn responses. And it made me see where some of my work is because we were raised by a European grandfather who there was a lot of fawning and hierarchy in our
He
family.
literally used to say, I am the king and this is my castle. And him and my dad would sit there when we had our Shabbat Friday night dinners
We
and
had to
we would get up
serve
and
them.
serve them first. Yes, this was
And then
happening in the
later they would do the
70s.
dishes and do housework and everything. So it was like this really weird mix of like that patriarchal awfulness. And then they participated in stuff and did things that maybe some other men wouldn't. So super weird and confusing and not, just 100% one way or another, a spectrum of it. But, when I examined what my survival parasympathetic nervous system was doing once I saw that and heard about it. One of the trauma, I was angry, wanting to fight, but I also had a fawning trauma response too of like, wait, could it be, is there, the magical thinking that kicks in of like, has there been some mistake? Could it really be this bad? Did that really happen? And that kind of denial, like I'm grateful that I have the awareness to observe that going off, detonating that trauma response, but
Yeah.
it still detonates. So I'm sharing that vulnerably um, because others may have had that happen too, while having the absolute no, and maybe you didn't, and and
Well, I
if
want to
if you did,
give a real acknowledgement to our friend Tasha Begg, the pop astrologist, who, bravely posted the first response to this, besides something on Threads. The podcast was actually up for an entire week before
two
anyone
weeks, it's been up for 2 weeks and it's still up.
it's still
Still
up.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, which Ricky, Steve, take that down, please. But
Yeah.
Tasha, Or don't leave it as a cultural artifact and take the shadow work medicine. But Stephen did comment on Tasha's call out post with don't confuse the medicine for the disease. So in his mind, he somehow believes that sharing openly about this is medicine. Now, this is really just the way the world works with synchronicities is interesting because one of my favorite news sources is Don Lemon's podcast. And he has been, if you want to talk about what happens with the I have a black friend gone wrong, in one of the most, awful, heartbreaking, and tragic ways is the case that's happening now in Mississippi of Nolan Wells. So Nolan Wells, and it hasn't gotten a lot of mainstream news coverage. Nolan Wells was
Not as much as it should have. Yeah.
high school senior, black student, football player, and he went on July 4th weekend boating with his white friends, his group of white buddies. And there's an island that everyone goes to, and he didn't come back with them on the boat and washed up, deceased on shore a couple days later. And there's been all sorts of things that are just not adding up. All the white families lawyered up. Now they're going on podcasts. The autopsy is botched. There's,
Oh my
you know,
God.
the family has hired his parents, just his mom. I think she's a psychologist. She's getting like all this racist
Oh,
hate on Yelp and people giving her like 1-star Yelp reviews who don't even know who she is. Like they're just the racism that they're facing.
devastating.
There's like layers on layers on layers. And, you know, that has brought up a dialogue, and Don Lemon has been covering that. Now today he had the comedian Godfrey on, who I just is just hilarious and does the best Trump impression ever, but he's hard hitting. He goes there, and
Yeah.
they actually brought up comedy, which is where Steven was going when he did his N word. They brought up the specific sketch that is at the heart of him and Don Lemon, Godfrey and Don Lemon, brought up this word association sketch done between Richard Pryor and Chevy Chase. And that aired,
On Saturday Night Live in
yeah,
the
December
1970s.
1975, December 13th, 1975. And it's like Richard Pryor is coming in for a job interview. And Chevy Chase is like, we're going to do some word association. And then, he says black, and Richard Pryor says white. And then it starts getting into racial slurs. And the audience is just roaring with laughter. Like, we are in a different world, people. We are in a different time. But this is probably when Steven was in his 30s watching SNL. And at the end of the word association game, Chevy actually drops the N word with a hard R on TV, network TV, and Richard Pryor's word association is dead honky, ha 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 ha. Anyways, that was comedy then. It's so hard to believe, but that is the word, that is what was referenced. And it's
That's how
interesting.
desensitized people were, and maybe, you know,
And that's
the
not to say, like, in any way that excuses it. But at the very end, like, Chevy Chase offers Richard Pryor a job, and it's like, don't hurt me. And another thing that's come up is like, Steven shares the story of like when he and Ricky met. The first thing that came out
in
of
one of
his
his
mouth,
workshops.
his
Yeah.
workshop was like, don't hurt me. And then they hugged. So, like,
That
it's
maybe
just
have been like stuck in his subconscious as a reference of some
and
kind.
again, this is not in no way to excuse what happened, but I'm just like, it was so interesting that happened on the Don Lemon podcast. Don Lemon is black. Godfrey is black, so they're talking about it today and
Such strange
missing
synchronicity.
comedy like that, they were saying. But I mean, it's like we're all, Ricky, I haven't heard a statement from him, but he blurs the lines a lot. He's like very pro marijuana use, which I think even got him kicked out or in trouble in the NFL.
Yeah,
He's a
he left
Gemini.
because he was using it to treat his mental health and well-being. So he's known for being a renegade and pushing the
Yeah.
envelope. But one another thing that I heard, so because there's this gulf, I mean, the internet and I think about like 1979 when Neptune and Pluto switched places for a brief period of time. Uh and Neptune became the farthest away planet. And I think it was like 79 to 98. So basically, the 80s and the 90s were when
Wow.
Pluto, which is the shadow planet, and Neptune's the healer, Pluto came closer to us and the veil of Neptune lifted. And that was a time when not only were there all these movies made that we watched when we were young because we were, watching TV in the 70s and early 80s, and they were showing things like Beverly Hills Cop and Saturday Night Live, where there was this whole new radical thing to do was have a black and a white actor as sidekicks in
Yeah.
a movie, and friends, and to take the sting out of the tension of the friendship and the racism, the racist elephant in the room, they would trade slurs the way they did in that skit. This is me just looking at it from 30,000 feet, not saying it's okay in any way, like, but anyone, people our age remember that, or people born in the 60s will remember that that was what we were served up, even on TV shows, sitcoms like Good Times and Different Strokes. That's what we watched all day, and there'd be these tense moments between the white and black characters, even when the show centered around the black characters. So that's a long time
Yeah, we don't
ago.
we don't get, like we're all millennials now. We're
It's
all
just so
Gen
yeah,
L,
exactly.
Gen
The
Z
only thing that
now.
I've just like I've been this incident has forced me to go back and remember, like, oh my God, I can't believe that was actually what our normal was when I watched that SNL clip. So and then they also talked about the Modern Elder Institute that both Stephen and Ricky have experienced by it's a kind of a transformational hardcore workshop similar to Est in the 1970s as well, where people in, Hoffman, like, where people kind of gather in these private small groups and release their shame and, deep secrets and trauma in this safe space to heal themselves from carrying the burden of that. They talked about that on the podcast too. And very few people will have the privilege of going to the Modern Elder Institute because it's very expensive and I believe exclusive, probably invitation only. Hoffman is like that too. I believe it is important and therapeutic work, but it's not general pop, the context, if that was the context of it. Having done workshops at places like Landmark and other places ourselves, we've witnessed those moments too. But
Yeah, the one takeaway from Landmark is they would tell us context is decisive. The
yeah,
context in which the conversation occurs determines how it will land. And, people didn't have context
not
for
at all. And
this.
that would happen in a Landmark class. Like, people would go for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, have a moment like maybe the one that Stephen and Ricky believed that they were having because they have a relatedness and that sort of thing. And then there'd be a Monday break. You go back into the world, and then on Tuesday evening there was sort of a graduations. There was a completion event, which was when you were supposed to bring friends and family, which is what got Landmark into a lot of trouble with its business model. We're not going to go there, but you would bring your friends and family and try to explain what had happened in that weekend. And they would either think you were in a cult or drank some Kool-Aid or were crazy, or they'd be like, wow, I want this for myself because I see this excitement and aliveness, but it would be nearly impossible to really
It didn't
explain. It was like
didn't
something's
explain the state. Like you had this incredible state change, and you seem crazy to someone who hasn't gone through the steps. Like that excitement looks spiraled. Like sure, there are some people who are like, "Oh my God, I'm sign me up." I mean, you did it first, and I was like,
and the only reason I
I
did
was
it was
gonna
I didn't
kill
even
you.
know
I was
what it
like,
was.
why are you
I did it
bringing up
because
all
my
these?
hairdresser had met a boyfriend there. I didn't know what it was, and I was just 29 and I wanted to get over this heartbreaking breakup I just had and meet a new boyfriend. So I was like, well, wow,
And you
she
did.
met a good guy there. I'll sign up. And then I showed up and I was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? But I stayed in it and I'm glad I did. It was very rigorous and so like you said at the beginning, like things that sometimes happen in private that we think are great and transformational are not for public consumption. But so now what the world is left with is that, this was festering in the space all along, this unacknowledged racist view or belief or just, it's so hard. This
It's so hard to talk about your friends on a
Yeah, it's
podcast
like
instead
this
of
this
to
this
them. But
ignorance or lack of awareness or lack of context or lack of, that is steeped in racism and racial harm, um, whether it was intended that way or not. Like I said, I know where Stephen's heart is, I believe, but I don't know where his head is. And it's not, and that's also a fawning trauma response. So my days are now also being spent catching myself going into fawn, like even saying something like that could be like, is that an apology that why am I doing that work? So resisting what women and people of color have always done, doing the work for the dominant cultural group or for men and letting them off the hook is entrenching ourselves even further in the burden that we're carrying. Like what is
right.
really with the North Node in Aquarius now? And Venus going retrograde, revealing this shit in Scorpio, the topic of
In
shadow
October.
work. They
Yeah.
haven't even, scratched the surface of it. It's like they
Well,
opened up
Venus is in
Pandora's box
Libra. Yeah, Venus is in Libra direct now till
tomorrow,
October.
as of tomorrow.
As
Yeah.
of tomorrow, August 6th to September 9th. Then it goes into Scorpio September 9th and stays in there a really long time. Normally it's in a sign for about 4 weeks, but it goes retrograde October 3rd, back into, back through Scorpio till October 25th, then backs up into Libra again, October 25th to November 13th, then turns direct November 13th to December 3rd, then goes back into Scorpio for the rest of the year. So basically, right now, Venus, the planet of peace, harmony, connection, love, but also, our values in terms of its rulership of what we consider valuable. It's in the same two signs, the two partnership
Yeah,
signs,
they're
Libra,
relational signs.
Libra and Scorpio. So Libra being that a little more of the fawning, like, oh, let's just, and I personally reached out to Stephen, how are you feeling? I wanted to ask him. I had another draft first, but I was like, okay, take it down a notch, Tali. This is your friend, but a friend who has done harm. How do you approach? It's very difficult to figure out how to
I mean,
navigate.
so thank you. I'm going to say their names. Nagak Loan Tran, an 18-year-old blogger in 2013, coined the term calling in. And educator and activist Loretta J. Ross has promoted it and popularized it. So calling out versus calling in. So many people of color have done this work. And I mean, I can't help but immediately think about Mel Robbins doubling down on let them. Like, it's well documented that a person of color came up with the term let them. She came across it, and then presented it as her own theory and just continues to indignantly and
Mm.
stubbornly defend it. And if she didn't know, she didn't know. But once you know, if you just that is and that see that's the where we find ourselves now. So what are you going to do about it? That is what everybody is sitting on the edge of their seats who is invested in a prior relationship with Stephen and his work to see what he'll do. And they're not satisfied in the slightest by how he's responded, and they want to hold him accountable. So while it's painful in the short term for him, no doubt, like
Well,
the
astrology is,
deeper
yeah.
pain is being felt by the people who are harmed by that word, by the rift it's caused in the astrology community. Right 1 month before UAC, the once every 4 years astrology conference taking place in Chicago, where Stephen was set to be a keynote. And I was looking forward to meeting him for the first time in person because we've only interacted online. We met during the pandemic. So that's all up in the air. And there are people who are just saying, how could you even think twice about this to UX? So there's a lot of pressure and tension, and it's boiling over. Just as Chiron went retrograde in Taurus. So that
And the
we talk
North
to
Node
Steve.
is in Aquarius, and Aquarius
Yeah.
rules astrology, the South Node
And the
in
South
Leo. So
Node
I'm
and Leo.
seeing it also
Yeah.
as like Stephen has
No
been one of the
pedestals, no
stars.
kings.
Yeah, he has been, he even jokes, oh, I'm like Elvis when I go to these astrology conferences. It's true, people tend to mob him.
The
But like,
king is not, there are no crowns when the South Node's in Leo. And our friend Tasha pointed that out
yeah,
very
I mean, it's a really
eloquently.
interesting moment for astrology, for the astrology world, but I think a chance to really just blow open the white supremacy and white male supremacy that has been quietly or not so quietly existing in the community all this time. I mean, there's such a lack of acknowledgement. There's a big, are you a traditional astrologer or a modern astrologer? The traditional astrologers study the Hellenistic from the Greeks astrology, and they stop at the planet Saturn, the planet of the patriarchy, right there. Um, and it's interesting that this is happening right before 2027 with human design as we move into out of the cross of planning into the cross of the sleeping phoenix. It's like,
Well, the
e-
year that Uranus was discovered, 1781, according to the human design theory, is when we move from being seven-centered to
and wasn't it
nine-centered
in
being.
Gemini then? It was just as it is now,
Yeah,
right?
Uranus was in Gemini, and um, what two of the centers split off, and one of them, the heart, actually split into two. One being the ego and will, which is the smallest center on the body graph, and the other being the G, identity, love, purpose, directional center. So it
Mm.
the binary heart is really what we're dealing with collectively, and we're supposed to have another what they call mutation starting February 15th, 2027, when that cross of planning gives moves to the sleeping phoenix era. We talk about that a lot in prior episodes, and I'm teaching about it in our current human design for astrologers course, and go into some detail on it there. So this is timely that it's just ironic, I guess,
Been
that the
there all
topic.
along. It's been there
Yeah,
all
no,
along.
yeah, it's just ironic that the podcast that got them into this that kind of blew the lid off of this was about shadow work. And for 40 minutes I listened to Ricky and Steven before went into the race part of it, have a beautiful conversation about shadow work filled with the advice that, I mean, if they're wondering what to do, they should just listen to the first half hour of their conversation because much of it is right there. But to talk about it as though you're distant from it and
Yeah.
immune to it and only
We're never
teaching as though
done.
you're done. There's so much of that. I mean, my mind is like filtering everything that I want to say. I almost said like, well, the astrology community can collectively heal this. And I was like, that's a trauma response. No, it is not Black people's job. It's not the job of people of color to collectively heal this. This belongs squarely to the white members of the astrology community to reckon with. They don't, it's not, like the burden on communities of color to educate their oppressors on how not to oppress them, to educate someone
Or to
on
ask
why.
Ricky to defend him. Like,
Yeah,
Ricky,
yeah,
stand up to the fact for me for the fact that I said the N word with a hard R. Like,
defending
no.
his character. I mean, yeah, it's like
Don't
Ricky.
defend. Don't like there's nothing, it's indefensible, but and so like get over the what I hope for you, Stephen, you're probably not gonna listen to this, but maybe you will. But what I want for you as your friend and someone who wants to see your work carry on is that you will encounter your own shadow, but also encounter the concept of white fragility, encounter the concept of white supremacy that we're all a part of. I remember when I first had to do that. We grew up in the Detroit area. We did have many Black friends and Arabic friends and all of that. And then went to University of Michigan and were lucky enough to have to take a sociology class. We're lucky enough to, learn about this from like a non-white, non-apologetic perspective at the University of Michigan. But I remember just being so shook and having to go through all kinds of like self-flagellation, inner like evaluating and reviewing, and that's happening again.
I spent
As
my summer after my freshman year reading the autobiography of Malcolm X and being like, oh, shoot, like,
like
and
I know nothing.
like, oh my God, wow. Like it hit me like the truth bomb it was. But I mean, you then won a contest at Sassy Magazine. We had another Rude Awakening. Tali won a contest at our favorite teen magazine, was flown to New York the summer after our first year of college with a group of other teens to put together a special issue of the magazine. She picked a Black model and an Asian model for the cover because Tali was the art director for that issue. And the white male publisher demanded that they put a white model on the cover too, because it would alienate readers in the South, and the Christian right would boycott the advertisers and essentially destroy the business, and the magazine would go out of business. So, which
that was
was a
in
thing that happened and still does.
1991 when that was not too
1991.
long ago, not too long
Yeah.
ago,
But I remember
although it
hearing
was
like that
scary
some
enough.
of
But
the editorial team jokingly referred to your issue as the PC issue, and like a sort of, oh, those crazy kids, like they're so political. So like this
I
was
remember that was what came out
35
of
years
the.
ago.
But I'm also, you and I are doing a lot of that work right now with re-educating ourselves about our own history, the history of Palestine and Israel, what we were taught, what we were told as, granddaughters of Holocaust survivors was a very limited picture of the history, and the daughter of a father who was a refugee to Israel as a child, and have multiple generations of family living there who came from countries that they were kicked out of, including Iran and Tunisia, but then knowing that we also did harm and knowing that we are doing harm and grappling with that. And there's so much duality in this. And I think that
That
if
seems to
there's
be coming up
anything
as a
to
theme. Yeah.
acknowledge there, if there's anything that we can acknowledge, is that, it is, there's a duality to all of it, in many parts, like, just as we have all these planets in our chart, we have all these parts inside of ourselves. Like, my son wants to go, like, kumbaya, let's all sit down and talk. My Scorpio moon wants to rage and post and be like, how could you? Mercury wants to record this podcast right now. Venus wants to, bring everyone together. Saturn wants to kick, all the racists out of the UAC conference and redo all the conferences from scratch. I mean, I'm just saying, like, we have so many different, it's okay.
Parts in
I'm not
ourselves.
surprised that in the comments, uh, you know, that people are also expressing their confusion, their shock, their fawning, their folding, their flight, their anger, and I also want to give like props to all the millennials out there and Gen Zers who are so far ahead of Gen X and boomers in your awareness and for
Yeah, they have
the way
zero
we
tolerance
but
for it.
you
Yeah.
teach us all by example, and I am just like, I feel like it's my job as somebody who's over 50 to stay open to what younger generations say. We can't just stop in the way it used to be and the way it was. Like hip hop, which was political when we were young, sounds, completely out of touch if I listen to 90s hip hop, though I still love it. I can't stay in that
The
phase.
heyday, the glory.
We
I mean,
can't.
and in your own life, you may have a situation like this. Like some people have relatives, many people have relatives that voted in a way that horrifies you, and they were beloved family members. To say this is the last stop on this. This is where we do the real accountability work to stop this historical trend, even if it's painful and
And I really
requires
do think that
giving
if
up.
Stephen can get to a place, there may be some people who that's it, unforgivable. And that is absolutely their prerogative. But there may be other people who are, I think if Stephen, actually sits down with anyone who's, and does the work with, to examine what white privilege and white supremacy truly are. And, the problem of saying, I have a black friend and I'm not racist, in light of that, as opposed to saying, wow, I must examine my bias and my unconscious racism that has now
Yeah.
surfaced.
I never thought of myself as racist, and now I just discovered that I was participating in a form of a manifestation or an expression of racism that I'm not educated. I mean, if we can keep educating ourselves about planets and stars and astronomical events and barbell
surely we can do.
baskets
Yeah,
and and be part of a school that calls itself evolutionary astrology, this is the evolution that
this
has
is.
arrived at the doorstep of evolutionary
And
astrology.
our
And
and our friend Brandy Moricum, who's been on the podcast, said something really, really insightful because it was brought up in the conversation that, Stephen actually is a distant relative of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was the founder of the KKK. And Brandy said, this might be an ancestral healing. Like this is his work to do, his soul's evolution to,
like a
truly,
shamanic
truly
perspective.
heal that, and I wonder, to see it like, okay, and Stephen said, I didn't come from a racist family. Well, maybe not your immediate family, but you're, and maybe not outwardly or consciously racist family, but that's in your lineage. So why not just take that and say, I'm gonna do the work that hasn't been done ever by anyone. And I know he has. I know Stephen
Mhm.
has the fortitude, the intelligence, the heart to go there and do that if he stops defending his position. And I personally will be continuing to reach out if he'll continue to talk to us after this podcast. And I've told him I would really be grateful and for the opportunity to talk to you about this further. And I continue to be open to that because, you know, that's I just am. That's because I am.
Yeah.
That's all, Yeah.
Well, because that's in the spirit of calling in, because we have a prior relationship with Steven, working on his app and endorsing his books, and him vice versa. And we have a relationship of mutual respect professionally. The hope is that maybe we can get through to him and have him hear it. Like, I know that, like, you have to, the person has to be able to hear the message, not as like you're a terrible person and burn in hell, but what you did put people through hell. And there should, if you truly are who you say you are for Black people and all people, there's no amount of hot coals you wouldn't walk over to prove that to them. Like,
Mm-mm.
literally walk the talk, not just with Ricky, but with everyone, I mean, it was funny because the last thing that he said, the very last words of their podcast were, um, Linnea, Ricky's wife, said something, had brought up the whole KKK lineage thing, which is questionable judgment, in my opinion, there to even bring that up, too. But at the end, she was like, well, you guys really went to some places. And Steven said, come pull your pants down with me and Ricky, which, that was an edgy thing to say. But what I think he meant was, obviously come expose the shadows of yourself. I mean, that was hard. Women may have been traumatized by hearing that one too. So
Mm.
there's probably some work to do there, but that's exactly what they did. So now that you have metaphorically done that,
Yeah. Now that
it's, I
you've
think about Hunter Biden, like, who Tali and I talked about a couple podcasts ago, like, who's an Aquarius and really demonstrating the Aquarius North Node sort of, he has been exposed for doing some of the worst things ever. And
he's not defending it. He's been in his
went to
12.
recovery, yeah, and he
Some
and he
recovery
yeah,
is
he
needed here.
yeah,
Recovery
and
work.
now, like, every time he comes on, instead of being like Hunter Biden, that terrible human being, people are like, wow, what a
He owns
more
his
this,
shit like
please. Yeah.
publicly in ways that we don't often see. And that was what we liked about
Redemption
doing
is
Landmark. That's what
available.
we liked
Re-
about Landmark when we used to do it. It was like, as a Sagittarius, I would go spend my time in this basement conference room on 34th Street by the Penn Station subway, like, and just because it was a space where, and it was probably a lot like what people get out of their recovery meetings. It was a safe space to go and authentically talk about the things, but talking
I think it was
about
what we witnessed, though, the beauty of witnessing someone go from being completely obtuse and unaware of what
having a
they were doing in the
transformation.
work that didn't, yeah, in the world that didn't work, having a transformation. and going out and then turning that into a redemption by living it, by aligning their actions and following
Well,
through with integrity. That is available to every human being on this planet. Redemption is always an
well,
option.
Venus is going into Scorpio. So Venus is going back and forth the rest of the year now between Libra and Scorpio. Scorpio being that phoenix rising
Shadow.
from the ashes, but down in the depths, the shadow. So I don't know if Steven's going to be at UAC this year. It doesn't seem likely, and I think that's probably for the best. I don't think he would be very welcomed there, but we'll see what happens. But whatever the case, between now and the end of the year is a really great window for some deep, deep self-reflection, reparation, possible redemption work. Like it's always available, but it has to come. You can't just skim the surface with this stuff. And, we're going to be announcing the theme of our 2027 book at our Lionsgate ritual this Saturday. We have a free ritual if you want to come to that. But let me just say, it is right. I mean, we come
It's
up with
very
these things
fitting.
early in the year, but it's like, damn, okay, here we go. Like it's already starting to show up. I mean, 2026, we named the year of the unbridled spirit. And, spirit, the gates have been broken, and it's like, this is a spiritual matter. It's affecting some of the spiritual leaders of the astrology community. Spirits are hurting right now. Even Stephen's spirit, I know he feels hurt and ashamed and all of that. So,
But in the spirit of not fawning, what is he going to do with it? As someone
yeah,
who has
yeah,
given guidance and dispensed wisdom and aligned with the Buddha at his
yeah.
disposal to do the soul searching. And I think it's just, listen, this is not an education that everyone has gotten. That's the tragedy of it. White supremacy is the curriculum of our country, and unlearning it is an extracurricular, optional. It's accessible, but it's not always on the radar of people to unlearn that. They feel that if they're good people, then they've done enough. And so there's a much deeper layer of it waiting to be done. And one thing my uncle David said to me years ago that he learned in a transformational workshop. He said the leader said to him, "Do you know the difference between a friendly person and a friend?" He said, "A friendly person tells you what you want to hear, and a friend tells you the truth or tells you what you need to hear." So I I offer this in the spirit of what that definition of a friend is, that it's because we know he can do better, and we know that Stephen has so much to offer the world, and it's not going to be able to be offered if this isn't repaired at the level of
Yeah.
soul, karmic, collective responsibility, ancestral, and more.
Yeah.
So, you know,
All right.
we hope that this has been a safe space for anyone who did listen to it with us, because it's very hard and risky to talk about this, but to not talk about it was a greater betray it would be a betrayal of our values and our commitment to an inclusive, evolving world that
A
honors
world of
everyone.
equity and equality and, humanity. So
Yeah.
we are
So with
progressed
that, we go into
Aquarius.
Venus and Libra.
Here we
Yeah.
go. Let it.
Harmony, return through the work that it takes to achieve it in a lasting way.
Okay, it's the wind down of 2026. The year started with a lot of Aries energy, Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And now we have Venus kind of coming in and, Venus ruling Libra, the opposite sign of Aries, taking us to the end of the year. There's been a lot of fighting and hate and anger all over on the
Saturn
global
and Neptune
stage.
are retrograde.
War. Yeah, they're
Mhm.
both retrograde now. So hopefully this
Give
will be
peace
done
a
with
chance.
love, but never love at the expense of justice. That's not real love. So love is, I don't, there's that love story. This is why the 70s are so like not the move, it was like, remember that movie Love Story? Love means never having to say I'm sorry. Bullshit. Love means saying I'm sorry and doing the work to know why you're apologizing and committing to not doing that harm again and doing the reparations that need to be done. So, here we are on this journey together. So, thanks for listening, everyone, and take care of your hearts. We'll be back again with more AstroTwins Radio this weekend. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to AstroTwins Radio. If today's episode gave you an aha moment, we'd be over the moon if you left us a 5-star review. It helps fellow astrology lovers find us. And make sure to hit subscribe and follow us on iTunes and Spotify so you never miss an episode. Want the full visual experience? You can also watch the video version on our YouTube at AstroTwins-TV. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at AstroTwins and head over to astrostyle.com to read your free daily, weekly, and monthly horoscope that we write for you with love. Until next time, move with intention and let the universe meet you there.